team.
Well, to get to the playoffs, they're going to have to do something, I think. And let's start off with that. Frank Klose, 97.3 ESPN.com. Rich wants to know, do the Phillies even realistically have enough to trade for a Baumgartner or Minor or any starter at this stage of the season?
Well, I do think that the Phillies do have some assets left to trade. I know that one thing that Rich was worried about in his question was he was worried about trading third base prospect Alec Bohm or Adam Hazley, who, of course, had a cup of coffee in the major league so far, but remains a strong Phillies prospect. So, we're in July, of course, and really how this trade deadline happens is going to really kind of determine a lot what you're just talking about just now, like where the Phillies will be and who they get is going to make all the difference. Phillies are skipping Vince Velasquez this time around in the rotation, so they know they need a starter. And Rich is asking about Madison Bumgarner and Mike Minor in particular. Now, Bumgarner, of course, is a trade candidate that the San Francisco Giants are going nowhere fast, and they really need some pieces to rebuild. And the one thing that's going to really kind of make all the difference in this scenario with Madison Bumgarner is he's on this no-trade list that he established in his contract where he gets to pick 8 teams to which he can reject a trade, and he picked all the possible teams that would probably trade for him at a trade deadline. So the reason he's doing that is he's trying to create some extra leverage for himself, and you don't know what that's going to cost you. So if he's going to hold out for more money, for an extension, depending on how demanding he is, that could help the Phillies price-wise. It could hurt the Phillies price-wise, or they might just not want to get involved in something like that. So that's an issue there. Mike Minor, talking about the Phillies holding a wild card spot at the moment. Well, so do the Texas Rangers. I don't know that Mike Minor is going to be traded. And you look at the Texas Rangers, they're hoping to build momentum to a new stadium in a few years. I'm not sure that they're going to want to give up the guy who's been their best starter this season. When all the talk about Mike Minor started, the Rangers were expected to go nowhere fast, and they still may go nowhere, but sending the message that they're giving up is not something you want to do if you're trying to create some momentum. Now, Matt Boyd, he's a name we've talked about before. He's a lefty starter for the Detroit Tigers, still under control for a couple seasons after this one, and he's somebody that I think the Phillies would be willing to give one of their bigger names up for, just because he's going to be around for a couple of years, and it's not just a quick rental. And, one name I want to throw in relation to Bohm and Hazley is Mickey Moniak, who's been having a very nice season for now the Reading Fighting Phils, and could be a candidate for a promotion soon. I guess a lot depends on his hamstring. He left the game the other day with a hamstring pull. But the Phillies will probably give up one of the outfielders, I think, if they need to close the deal, preferably someone that they'll have beyond this season. But Alec Bohm is somebody that could be a Phillies starting third baseman next year, and I don't think they really want to trade him in a deal. They haven't really declared anybody as untouchable, but I think they want to keep Alec Bohm around because they're going to need a starting third baseman next year, and he could be that.
Call me crazy, Frank, but when we talk about Madison Bumgarner and the odds of him potentially becoming a Philly, I have to think that the odds of him becoming a Yankee, a Red Sox, maybe somebody in the American League, even maybe a team ahead of them in the National League first before he would be a Philly, just based on, those teams tend to be more aggressive. Those teams have great, especially the Yankees. They always have really good farm systems. And I just feel like if the Giants want to trade him, they're going to try to look to trade him to the American League anyway, if they have even close to an equal offer.
Well, I think the reason why the Phillies might not get somebody like him is it hasn't really been their style so far. Now, last year they were in on Manny Machado, if you remember, at the trade deadline, but they didn't go the extra mile to land one of those rentals. And I would kind of see the Phillies not going too far for a rental, which is why I would probably think that Madison Bumgarner might not be the type of pitcher that they're looking for.
Frank Klose with us here at 97.3 ESPN. All right, Andrew has the big question. If the Phillies sell, who do they got? Who are some of the current players on their roster that could be moved?
Yeah, this is pretty interesting. I think we all are sitting here expecting the Phillies to buy. I think the Phillies didn't come as far as they went so that they could sell pieces off at the trade deadline. And certainly, if you're spending all these prospects to get JT Realmuto, you spend all that money to get Bryce Harper. The Phillies plan to be in this thing, so I tend to think that they're going to add. But if you look at who they might sell, there really aren't a lot of candidates for a trade deadline trade because the guys that have expiring contracts on this team, three of them are relievers. You have Pat Neshek, who's hurt, Tommy Hunter, who's been hurt, and they need him anyway. I mean, even if the Phillies aren't contending, they really do need somebody who can get some outs in the bullpen. Juan Nicasio, who really hasn't been that inspiring for somebody to want to trade for him. And then you have Cesar Hernandez, who's the second baseman. And, the Phillies, of course, have another guy they can throw at second base. But, I don't really see any of those players really fetching you anything of significance. And, when the Phillies are looking down the stretch, I think what they might do if they're not going to contend, if you get to the point like you were just saying a minute ago where they maybe are 10 games out, but I don't think that's going to happen until the end of August or as you get to September, if you really know that they're out of it. And I think that the move that they're going to make if they're really out of it is not to sell pieces, but maybe that's when Adam Hazley comes back up and he gets center field for the rest of the season to see what he can do. Or maybe that's when Alec Boehm comes up and they say, all right, take third base for the rest of the season to see what he can do. But I just don't really see the Phillies in a situation where they want to sell. I think they'll be hanging in enough that they're not going to be considered sellers. I think they'll try to add. But if they are eventually, quote unquote, out of it, I think that's what they would do is to try to use those younger players a little bit to see what they have going into next year.
Paul wants to know, Frank, if the Phillies plan on re-signing Cesar Hernandez, and if not, would you consider trading him and playing Scott Kingery every day at second base? Who would you replace Cesar with in the lineup if that scenario turns out to be true? And what do you think the Phillies could get in return for Hernandez?
Well, I think the thing with Cesar Hernandez is the same issue that they faced in the offseason. The second base market was kind of flooded last offseason. And it still remains plenty of options out there for somebody who needs a second baseman if they're looking to make a trade. I think last offseason the Phillies had two choices. They could simply non-tender Cesar Hernandez and just let him walk as a free agent, or they could just stick with him because a trade was not really in the works then. And I think they're going to be in the same situation now. It's better to keep him. At this point, even if they fall out of contention, as we saw, though, Scott Kingery can bounce around the diamond just fine. If they're adding a third baseman, if they're adding a center fielder or something like that, they could certainly give Scott Kingery some at-bats at second base. But with Hernandez still on the roster, I think at this point they're just going to kind of let the season run its course. I think Scott Kingery is going to be the starting second baseman next season. But if there's nothing you're going to get in return, I don't see why the Phillies don't do which they did this offseason, which is simply just keep him around. And with Hernandez and those other names I mentioned, the Phillies with those three relievers, that's $26 million that comes off the books in terms of average annual value going into next year. And Cesar Hernandez is another $7 million added to that. So you're talking $33 million is going to walk at the end of the season, and that's money under the competitive balance tax, not total dollars. So, that's the number that's going to matter, because once you go over that list, that number, you're going to start losing draft picks and stuff like that, or getting bounced down in draft order. So I think the Phillies just still want to avoid that, and they'll just let these guys kind of have their contracts expire, and then next year I do think Scott Kingery will have second base.
All right, for Frank's mailbag, go to 973ESPN.com, and, of course, you can text him your questions at Frank Klose with a K. That's Klose. Frank Klose joins us on the Boardwalk Honda hotline. All right, pal, enjoy the Brave series.
Thanks, guys.
See you, Frank.
All right, Frank Klose every week. Does a little baseball with your mailbag there.